What's up, folks? We're going to try something a little bit new today. I've been wanting to put up more X-Wing content because I absolutely love X-Wing miniatures, and I've been playing the game for a long time. So, as a precursor to this, I just dropped on Reddit and asked to see what kind of content people would like to see, and I'm going to test it out and see how it goes. So, one of my brave guinea pigs who first reached out suggested that I cover specific pilots, and then another helpful commentator suggested Suralinda Javos, who we're going to go ahead and jump on. So I'm going to try to keep this video very short. We're going to break down the pilot, a little bit about the ship, and then also the pilot herself. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of meta relevance and some list builds. So let's dive right in. Again, the ship. So the pilot is Suralinda Javos, and she's a pilot of the RZ-2 A-Wing, which you can see in the picture here. It is black box. It is X-Wing 2.0, X-Wing 2.5 legal, and it's for the Resistance faction. And the character herself is Suralinda Javos, who's a cool character. She trained in the New Republic Navy with Poe Dameron and then served there for a while. Later became a reporter and has kind of a interesting path to end up joining the Resistance. That's all introduced in the Poe Dameron comics. Super tangent. I just recently actually read through basically all of the Star Wars comic runs out there. And of course, the best is going to be the Darth Vader runs that are like truly flashy and dramatic. But in terms of the writing and interesting story, I would say the Poe Dameron ones are actually way up there, and I enjoyed them a lot. So yeah, cool character, cool origin. We're going to jump into the ship. And so we're going to jump here. Zoom is, of course, right in the way. Now, Sarah Linda herself, again, is a pilot for the RZ-2 A-Wing, but she's only available in the Heralds of Hope Squadron pack. So she's an additional pilot, not one that comes with the base RZ-2 A-Wing. So it was pretty funny. I actually looked her up on List Fortress, which is the list building app that shows a lot of tournament results, and even pinkbrainmatter.com. And I found nothing. No one flies this pilot. But she's cool and has a cool ability. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that. And that is actually why I was so excited to dive in, because basically no one has talked about this pilot anywhere that I was able to find. I think the name's come up in a couple reviews when the pack came out. She's popped up here and there, but extremely rarely. So at this moment, she's in the RZ-2 A-Wing. It's a Resistance ship. She comes in at 4 squad points. See that right here? And she rolls in with 10 loadout, which is actually quite high for that ship. So the RZ-2 A-Wing with the higher amount of loadout is kind of fun. And then in terms of upgrade slots for those 10 loadout, she's got 2 talent slots, which is awesome. She's got a cannon upgrade, which is very unusual for A-Wings in general. And then she's got a tech and a modification. So with 10 points, there's a lot you can do there. But let's take a look at the ship first. So for anyone familiar with the game, it's an A-Wing. So it's got those base stats of 3 green dice to make it very dodgy and hard to hit, and then has both 2 hull and then 2 shields for 4 total hit points. But it's one of the dodgier aces that also has extra shields. So they can go poof very easily, but they tend not to die as quickly as some others. She's not a TIE fighter. She's not a TIE interceptor. She's already coming to this with a little bit more of a durability bump on that. So that's good. Also base 2 attack dice, and I wanted to make sure to point out this turret indicator because the RZ-2 A-Wing has a built-in turret, so it doesn't have a primary forward arc gun. What it does instead is, as a turret, you can point forward or back, and there is a white rotate action on the card you can use to go ahead and flip that forward or back. I believe. I may actually be wrong about that. Looks like no. Sorry, it's only in the refined gyro stabilizers ability of the chassis that lets you do this. So you can only rotate to the front or the back, so you can't do a left or right arc with this. So it's not a true turret, but it's pretty close. And after you perform an action, you may perform a red boost or a red rotate. So you can only do the rotate action as a link off of another action. That said, when you first deploy the ship, you can choose whether it's pointing forward or back. So you don't have to do the action to choose to point this back, for example. She also rolls in with your pretty decent A-Wing bar with that focus, evade, target lock, barrel roll, and boost. I love a ship that has both the barrel and boost. And with that chassis ability, she does have the option to double action, where she could focus boost, she could roll boost because of that chassis ability, which is so good. And I should do a quick tangent here that I'm coming to this as a scum player. I've basically never flown Resistance. I've flown a little bit of everything except Resistance and First Order. And so part of what I'm coming to this from is the perspective of I will look first, both in terms of upgrades and options for the things that I most wish I had in my faction, which is going to be Scum and or Separatist. So that ability to double action into a boost is something that I think only Fang fighters have in the entire Scum faction. It's something I really wish a lot of ships had. And being able to barrel roll and then also boost is something that I don't think even Fang Fighters have unless you spring for afterburners. So, tangent. So let's talk a bit more about the ship. We talked about the slots, the actions, the ship itself. One thing we haven't touched on is that initiative 3. Now, right now, kind of in the competitive meta, there's a race to the top where the majority of pilots you run into, might be in a little exaggeration, but not too much. Every single list you run into is going to have at least one I6 and I5. I can say that with some confidence. It's not going to be universally true, but you'll have mostly ships that have higher initiative, with 5 being extremely common, 4 being a little bit common, and 3 and below being pretty rare. So this is a pilot you can bring, assuming that she's going to move first most of the time and shoot second, which is a little bit risky with this ship. But she doesn't have the damage output where you could really expect her to initiative kill a ship, especially or except in some very rare cases. But you never know. So we're talking low initiative, fairly fragile, and coming in at that 4 squad points is relatively high. So you can see on this list, I went ahead and pulled up the 2 A-Wing pilots that are 3 points in resistance that you could do alternatively to build a list. And then I also pulled up a 4-point equivalent A-Wing that is an alternative you could take to Suralinda. And I also pulled up a T-70 that's kind of equivalent as well with the same initiative and all that. So why did I bring these up? I brought these up because whenever you're looking at a pilot, you want to look at, okay, I like this pilot. It's got a cool ability, whatever. I'll see if I'll slot in. You always do also want to look at the other options and see if there's a dramatic disparity here. Like for 4 points, am I getting my points worth? Am I getting a decent value, a roughly equivalent value? Could I get the same or better cheaper? Could I get better at the same price point? So let's talk about some actual builds we could do with her. So we've talked about that low initiative. One thing we haven't talked about is her ability. So after you partially execute a maneuver, you may gain 1 strain token to rotate 90 or 180. So a hard left, a hard right, or a full flip around, which is pretty cool. So if you bump, if you move and you hit something on your path, you then have an option to reposition to either adjust your attack arc to make sure you have a shot on something, or set up your following move. I do appreciate that it's a strain, as much as that's a huge downside for this ship. That is kind of a cool ability to be able to move like that, and it's not a stress. So she could bump, rotate, not stress, and then pull a red maneuver the next turn. So you can deliberately bump as a way to turn around without having to take the stress. It's a big risk, but one of the cooler things about being low initiative, since you are moving first, most of the time, you're going to know where your opposing ships are first. So you can deliberately hit something, use this ability, and then set yourself up later without them having any agency to kind of get in your way or get out of your way to stop it. So that's something to think about with this ability, and maneuverability is really, really key on ships like this. These little A-Wings are excellent objective grabbers, very obnoxious, and in particular the RZ-2s, the resistance A-Wings, having that turret arc is really, really nice with a rotate. So you can always kind of move around your attack arcs, even if you're not pointed in the right direction. So these things can fly away from you and still shoot, which is a real nasty piece about them. And Suralinda has an unusual advantage on that, where she has both a lot of loadout and a cannon slot. So looking at this, the first thing I saw when I pulled out this pilot was like, you know what, I can slap an ion cannon on there. Boom, let's do it. And one of the great things about this is that gives her a primary forward arc. So she'll, well, not a primary arc, excuse me, a forward arc that's 3 attack dice. So she gains an attack die, and she has a forward arc, so she can keep her turret pointed backwards and still be able to shoot at the front if shots come up, which is a great combo. And then Ion does Ion tokens, so you can only ever do a maximum of 1 damage. But since you were already throwing 2 attack dice anyway, that's not a huge downgrade, and your hits are more likely to go through because you're throwing 3 dice instead of the 2. So that's the first place I start. Of course, you could always get weird and throw on a jamming beam or a heavy laser cannon, and the heavy laser cannon will throw 4 dice, won't deal any crits, but they're 4 dice that will actually do damage. So there's definitely some appeal to that. But I personally, at low initiative, that's fairly risky. I love the HLC, but if you have the points for an ion cannon, do it. And then one of the cool things I found here is that every other upgrade I was looking at with Suralinda is cheap, like really cheap. So one tech that's come up in resistance a lot right now is going to be your Ferrosphere Paint. And that's a defensive tech where after an enemy ship locks you, if you are not in that ship's bullseye, that ship gains 1 stress token unless it chooses to break its lock. Now, that's defensive because it discourages ships from taking a target lock on Suralinda, which is cool. But with the bumping ability, there's a fair chance that you're going to use her as a blocker, and there's a good chance she'll end up in bullseyes fairly often. And since she's moving first, Well, actually, that's kind of good. So moving first, you're more likely to have ships bump you and lose their action anyway. So the ships you're bumping are already not likely to get a lock because they're bumping and losing their action aside from a focus. But it's okay. The only thing about it is it does require that they take a lock, which they're not always going to do. Now, it is nice that that does more or less shut down ordnance. If someone wants to hit you with a missile, most missiles or torpedoes won't be able to get through that. So that's the thing. But another case where her initiative is a feature, not a bug, is automated target priority. On any single ship that is initiative 3 or lower, which is a requirement for this ship, with a tech slot, this is a good thing to look at because so it's got a downside. While you perform an attack, you must choose a defender at the closest valid attack range. After you perform an attack that missed, place 1 calculate token on this card. Before you engage, you may remove 1 calculate token from this card to gain a matching token. So it's 1 point, which is something to keep in mind. The downside that you must choose a defender at the closest valid target attack range. Most of the time, that's going to be what you want to shoot at anyway, but not always. But that's where Suralinda herself is particularly good in this case because she can do that rotate. So you do a partial move, you bump, you say, I don't want to shoot at this thing to the left, I'm going to flip to the right, and then make sure my attack arcs are pointed at something different, either something closer or something at the same range, so you can kind of choose what you want to shoot at when. Now, she does have the 2 attack arcs, but my understanding is wow means that you declare an attack. You say, I'm going to shoot out of my front arc, I'm going to shoot out of my rear arc. And then after you declare which arc you're using is when that triggers. So you don't have to say, there's an enemy at range 1 in your rear arc, an enemy at range 2 in your front arc. You can still say, I'm shooting out the front and shoot at the thing at range 2. That is my understanding of how that works. So I do want to make sure I'll clarify that later. But so that is an advantage where she's not always stuck with that. So the downside isn't as bad with her. And then it gives you a mod you can pretty much always trigger, which takes some of the sting out of bumping because you can bump focus, but then you can also have that backup token on you when you engage, which is going to be fairly late because she's initiative 3. Not a bad upgrade. It's one of those kind of insurance upgrades where it's not going to do all that much all the time, but throughout the course of a game, assuming she lives that long, you are going to get some decent mileage out of those free calculate tokens. So that is something to look for. And it's also, you place a calculate token on the card, you may spend it. I believe you can have more than 1 calculate on the card and bank them. That also is my reading of that. I may be wrong on that too. But okay, let's look at some of the other slots. She has double talent, and Resistance has some excellent talents. The first one I reached for is, again, one that I don't have in my faction. Starboard Slash. At 1 point, it's an easy buy with the remaining loadout that she's got. And this is after you fully execute a maneuver, you may choose 1 enemy ship you moved through. That ship gains 1 strain token. Then if you are in that ship's firing arc, you gain 1 strain token. Now here again is a case where Suralinda's low initiative is a feature. Because if you're planning to use this, you know where the enemy ships are, and you can figure out where you're going to go. And this is something that they'll always have to keep in mind, is they know that you're moving first, and they have to understand that their ship may end up strained, which will force them to fly in a certain way unless they want to take that defensive debuff, because the strain token reduces their agility for the first shot that they would take. So it's a really fun piece, and it's also a bit of insurance where if you go for a bump and you miss it and you accidentally clear the ship you're trying to bump, this is another ability you can trigger that can use her rear attack arc or can set up your other ships for an attack. And also is a reason for enemy ships not to get too aggressive with Suralinda, because she can punish them, not a lot, but a little bit. So that's the first thing I went to. And then I also grabbed, of course, one of my most hated, but also one of the most powerful upgrades in the game. That is Heroic. This is your mulligan ability. It's another one of those ones where it was 1 point, which I thought personally was broken as heck. And it still is extremely good at 2 because it is a free reroll. Now it's conditional. So while you defend or perform an attack, if you have only blank results and you have 2 or more results, you may reroll any number of your dice. That applies to defense or offense, and there is no limit. So if you're shot 6 times and you blank out on your green dice every time, you just get to free reroll the entire thing. Now, chances are you're going to get 2 blanks and an eyeball, and then it doesn't do anything. But she does have a 2 attack die gun on that turret, which makes her offense much better. If you have both heroic and automated target priority, those primary attacks suddenly are dramatically more dangerous because you get the potential free reroll, plus the potential focus mod with that calculate token. So those are things that can kind of add up and make her a little bit more dangerous. Right now we're sitting on exactly 10 out of 10 loadout. This is the build I settled on as my personal favorite. Of course, your mileage may vary, but if you're taking Suralinda, I would strongly consider something like this. She's got some other options too. I did mention, and these will all be grayed out because I've already spent all of her points. But so we can go and take this off, take a look at some other stuff. You can also look at things like shield upgrade or afterburners, just ways to kind of get her around a bit more and focus on her role as an objective grabber. Those are fine. The shield upgrade is nice defensive tech. It's a lot of points to spend in a ship when that doesn't make it all that much more durable. Afterburners is good, but it's anti-synergy with her ability, and she already has plenty of access to boost, especially the linked boost, so she can do another action and then boost as well. So those are not bad upgrades. They do give you extra options, but I think that your points would be better spent elsewhere. We've got the other options here. None of those are going to matter. Do not baffle on an A-wing, as much as I love it. You do have the option of primed thrusters, which is while you have 2 or fewer stress tokens, you can perform boost and barrel roll actions even while stressed, which is great, is that just lets you kind of zip around the board and completely ignore stress. The downside to that is that only allows you to do your barrel roll and boost actions. So you can't do objective actions, you can't do target lock, you can't focus. So it's good, but you want to understand what you're losing when you're using this. I don't know that that's worth 6 points usually, unless it's a ship that has some other way to do mods without using the focus or target lock actions. You also have pattern analyzer, which is you can fully execute a red maneuver and then perform an action even after doing that, which is kind of great. Uses up half your loadout, but still I had the ion cannon on there. So if you don't take that, you have the points to play with. Then of course we got the offensive choice of advanced optics. While you perform an attack, you may spend 1 focus token to change one of your blank results to a hit, which makes your ships extremely accurate, even though it costs a focus token. That is something I would consider more on a higher initiative ship. It's more likely to get initiative kills because it's purely offensive tech. It's good, and A-Wings are dodgy enough to avoid arcs even at low initiative that you could get some mileage out of that, but I wouldn't count on it very much. Targeting synchronizer, I would skip right over because that, well, let's talk about that. So because she's a cheaper ship, you could use her to bank target locks for your other ships. So she gets the target lock, other ships use that to fire torpedoes and missiles, and then you don't have to worry about that. So they can shoot those without the target locks. It's not the worst thing. It's not something I would put on there, but it is worth mentioning. Ferrosphere paint and ATP, we already talked about. Adenosine triphosphate, haha. But no, we're not going to worry about that. Some other options here, you've got that Marge stable closure. This is one where if you're flying through rocks or obstacles, I personally would only do this with gas clouds, and even then that's a giant gamble. This will do the same strain thing that you can do with Starboard Slash, but it's an upgrade that's really intended for ships that don't have access to Starboard Slash. So it's fine, I wouldn't worry about it. Marksmanship, also, she doesn't really have the offensive output to make that worthwhile. You've got 2 talents though, so you can use it, so why not? She does, again, have the 2 talent slots, so there's always something like Lone Wolf or Predator are not the worst options. Predator I would shy away from because that discourages you from using both sides of the arc, and with a ship as mobile as an A-Wing, it's a really good idea to get full freedom of using both of your arcs. Similarly, Crack Shot is also very good, especially if you do that with the ion cannon. That then is your entire loadout, but that still is a decent piece to go ahead and throw in there. Debris Gambit doesn't do anything for her. Elusive is always an option, and that just gives you a free defensive reroll, and then if you do a red maneuver, you recharge it because it's a single use. Trick Shot, Daredevil, I do like Daredevil, except that you can't do that with your combo ability. So really the ones we already talked about are the ones I would seriously consider in Suralinda because of the loadout she has and kind of the role she fills as a low initiative A-Wing. You can actually really build a lot into that, but if you go too much out of that, you go over the loadout, she's going to be less efficient, less useful. So let's compare her to some of the 3-point A-Wings. There are 2 options in resistance. They're basically the same chassis, but Merle Cobbin here is initiative 1. So even though initiative 3 is fairly low, there are initiative 3 and below ships in the game that still are seeing play. So if you're counting on Suralinda moving first, and that's how your build is for, Merle is more reliable at initiative 1. Initiative 1 is very rare. You're not going to see many ships out there that are going to move before this guy. So you at least know that he's going to move first and shoot last. So having that knowledge is sometimes worth a lower initiative just for having the guarantee. The lower initiative is also an advantage on several of the missions and objectives in the game, and also makes her a better blocker if you want to throw the ship in front of enemies. And on that note, Merle is only 3 points. He's a much less risky blocker to throw in front of ships. You lose him, you're not losing as many points in the full spread of things. So, and his ability is when a friendly ship at range 0 to 2 performs a primary attack, if you are in the defender's bullseye, the defender rolls one fewer defense die, which is awesome. Especially for a blocker. You just plant this guy in front of people and be like, well, there you go. You're a lot weaker. So you really could consider putting both of these in a squad and having them fly together. Merle for the blockers, Suralinda for the dodge around, but then also using that starboard slash. Because if you hit a ship with both, it can't move, loses its action aside from a focus, and then suddenly it is also strained. So it is strained and rolling one fewer defense die if you position Merle to be in that bullseye of that ship. So that ship is taking some heat if you manage to block it successfully. If you're struggling with slow, larger ships that are easier to predict or get in front of, and they're hard to kill, this is a great way to deal with those, that combo together. So for that 7 points, you get the two and kind of get the best of both worlds where you have two A-Wings and one of them is cheap. So you don't have to worry as much about paying more for the one because you have a cheaper one. And kind of in the same vein, but both of these three-pointers do trade their lower point cost for dramatically lower loadout and fewer slots. So they're definitely not as flexible as Suralinda. You can't do as much with them, which is one of the trade-offs you get for going a cheaper ship. Roby Tice is the next one up. Roby is after you defend at attack range 1, if the attacker modified its dice, the attacker gains 1 deplete token, which is a red token, but it goes away when they shoot. So that is nice to kind of reduce offensive output that they're putting. He's initiative 4, which is smack in the middle, so you don't get the benefit of being high or low initiative, which is the worst of both worlds. Roby's fine. I do think Merle is better, which is funny to say, but it's still not awful, especially if you're taking something that depends on attackers having orange or red tokens. There's something there, but I still wouldn't bank much in that. Next up, we look at some sort of equivalents that are another 4-point A-Wing that's about the same, also initiative 3. Sorry, Bangle, you do not skip your perform action step after you partially execute a maneuver. So if you bump into opposing ship, you get to do your action still. So you target lock, focus, barrel roll, whatever, which is really great because you can hit a ship and then barrel roll off it out of its arc and then suddenly have a good shot on it, even though you did hit it, which is cool. And also has that double tech slot and a little bit more loadout than Suralinda. So definitely another one to look at, just with a slightly more flexible build. But notably does not have the cannon slot. And I will say one of my favorite things about the cannon on these things is none of these ships want to be taking target locks. So any kind of ordnance you put on these is extremely risky, where a cannon, you just always have that shot and you don't need to take a target lock to shoot it. Mileage may vary, but I personally prefer cannons over ordnance on your dodgy ships by a significant amount. Especially your lower initiative ones that are going to shoot second and want to take some kind of defensive tech. I do think that ability is probably more consistent, but I think that of these two, I actually think that Suralinda brings more to the table than Zari. Not necessarily because of the abilities. The abilities are meh. Zari's is probably better, but I like the cannon. I think the cannon actually makes the difference there. But the biggest resistance lists we're seeing right now are ones that have just 5 4-point ships, where you can fit Suralinda in there, but if you do, she's competing with most of the T-70s and then also the fireballs. And so here's a somewhat equivalent T-70. You've got the extra attack die, you've got 1 less evade, but an extra 2 hull and an extra shield. So it's a much more durable ship, has a similar action bar, but has lower loadout, which is interesting, but then also comes in with more slots and double missile, double mod. And this is a really interesting one. And her ability is while you perform a missile or torpedo attack, or torpedo or missile, you may treat the front arc requirement as rear for that attack. And if you do, treat the range requirement as 1 to 2. So she doesn't have the loadout for a ton of missiles, but that does let her shoot a range 2 to 3 missile or torpedo at range 1 to 2, which is nice by itself. Just kind of an interesting piece. But I will say on that 4-point scale, in this particular case, as a lower initiative 4-cost ship, Suralinda also compares favorably with Vanessa Doza, but not necessarily to some of the other T-70s out there. And just about all of them are 4 points. Now, I will say, though, one of the things about this is if you take Suralinda and then 2 3-point A-Wings, you're painting a giant target on Suralinda's back because she's got the same durability as a 3-point A-Wing, but is worth 1 more point. So she's definitely worth shooting at. Whereas there is kind of a bait and switch you can do with a 4-point list, where if you mix in Suralinda with a bunch of X-Wings, then there's really kind of a question. Do I shoot at the ship that's harder to hit, or do I shoot at the one that takes more damage? And both choices are kind of wrong because they're all worth the same points value. So I kind of like that. And that also gives you the option to kind of flex a little bit and distract people just with target priority, and gives you a bunch of options to benefit from Suralinda's ability, where the starboard slash I like setting up on her, so that strained enemy has a lot of shots coming in on it, and a lot of places so they can't prevent you from getting the benefit of that strain because you've got a bunch of attack arcs. Now, the next kind of piece, so I put this together as kind of a rough list. Obviously, I'm 5 points over, but so you can remove the other RZ-2. And then I've got 1 point left, so I can sub one of these guys down to a 2 point. And I believe better little escape pod is a 2 point. Yeah, BB-8, perfect. Okay, so I'll drop Roby. And now we have a 20-point list. It's a little weird, but it's there. So we've got Suralinda, we've got BB-8 and the resistant transport pod, which is the most obnoxious 2-pointer in the game. We're way up there. We've got Merle just for fun. And then we've got, you could swap these too. No, you can't. So yeah, in this kind of list, you do have to have a 2 point. But I've got Poe and the Falcon, who's an absolute monster. So 5-ship list, Poe Falcon. You've got Suralinda in there as a support piece, a distracting piece that can debuff the targets that Poe wants to hit and really kind of benefit you overall, while also being a good objective piece and being fairly durable for the points. Plus potentially bringing in an ion cannon, which can really mess up some of the current meta monsters. So that's my breakdown in Suralinda. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully I successfully covered the ship. And yeah, let me know what you think. Ooh, quick side note on the ion cannon, why I like it on Suralinda. Two of the scarier ships out there right now are Arc 170s in Republic, and then Han Solo and the Falcon, and of course Poe and the Falcon. All of those are ships that do not like getting planked by an ion cannon. Because if the ion cannon gets them ionized, they are then much more predictable and a lot easier to surround and take down. So having some ion control in your list is a really good way to go at the current meta. And Suralinda is one of the cheaper ways to bring that. So yeah, let me know if you want to see other pilots. Let me know if you have any feedback on this. And until next time. Now I should salute. That's fine.